Today marks 50 years since the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. But what many don't know is that on that same day, another iconic figure passed away, renowned Christian author and scholar C.S. Lewis. This week, the life of the author of the Chronicles of Narnia was celebrated by many around the world. David Cathcart takes us on a journey to learn more about Lewis's personal journey of faith.
C.S. Lewis, who went by the name of Jack all of his life, grew up with his older brother Warnie in Belfast, Northern Ireland.
His grandfather was a minister, so he had that tradition. He had an understanding of Christianity, but he didn't really grapple it to his soul until much later.
From very early on, Lewis had what we would probably now want to call mystical experiences. He had these stabs of joy and longing. He tells about just seeing a little model of a garden that his brother had made, standing under a flowering currant bush, and how the memory of that pierced him with a kind of longing.
But the beginnings of Lewis's faith suffered with the death of his beloved mother.
She had been a bulwark. She had been someone that he relied upon. Her faith was his faith. And when she died when he was 10 years old, that began a rather gradual erosion of his own faith, until when he studied under his great teacher, W.T. Kirkpatrick, his great tutor. Kirkpatrick himself was an atheist. Lewis eventually sort of adopted Kirkpatrick's point of view.
Jack enlisted in the Army and fought in World War I. He experienced all the horrors inflicted on soldiers in trench warfare. Afterward, as he studied at Oxford University, his journey away from faith was now complete.
He went through the whole process of being the angry atheist coming out of the First World War.
In Lewis's early writings, the poems and Spirits in Bondage, what we find there is a person who on the one hand denies God, but on the other hand hates God. So he's living in, as he refers to it, he's in a world of contradictions. He's angry about what's happening to him, he's angry about what he sees happening in the world, and he blames God, and yet at the same time he doesn't want to believe in God.
One of the interesting things that Jack discovered when he first went to Oxford University was that there are many people whom he really got on with very well, he liked enormously. And after a year or so, he suddenly began to realize that the people he liked all happened to be Christians. He had this intensely rational, logical mind. If he liked someone, he would really want to figure out for himself why he liked them. And he found that it was the way they lived their lives that made him find them attractive personalities, nice blokes, good companions, good friends. When he discovered, of course, that the people who lived these lives that way were Christians, he must have had to start thinking, well, maybe there's something to it after all, because it seems to work.
His pursuit of truth made him uncompromising. He wouldn't settle for Christianity when it sounded like a silly story someone was making up.
Because Lewis had a real difficulty reconciling his interest in myths and Norse sagas. He really loved that kind of stuff, but he was also a rationalist. He was a modern man in 1931, and he only wanted to believe things that were actually true.
C.S. Lewis's journey to faith is sort of like a two-stage rocket, you know, that one level fired off and then the next level fired off, that he first had to go from atheism to a belief in the existence of God.
He soon became a theist. He suddenly realized that there is no other answer that works. There must be a God.
And almost more difficult was from a belief in God to a belief in Jesus Christ.
Lewis loved taking long, extended walks with his friends. Many times their conversations turned toward belief in God and faith in Jesus Christ.
And you can imagine late at night after dinner, C.S. Lewis is walking with Tolkien, the author of the soon-to-be author of The Lord of the Rings. These two great men are walking together. And Tolkien, who was already a Christian, was explaining to Lewis that the Christian story is the world's only true myth.
When he was presented with the true myth, the one that really happened, he rejected it. And it was pointed out to him, I think, probably by Tolkien that particular evening in Oxford, that the reason he rejected it was because it really happened. Because people were telling him that it really happened. It wasn't just a story. Because that knowledge suddenly demands from you a reaction of choice, to believe it or to reject it.
Somehow what Tolkien had described to him that night sunk in a couple of days later.
Jack was leaving his home in Oxford, called the Kilns, for a trip to the zoo in his brother Warnie's motorcycle sidecar. At some point during that ride, Lewis finally came to a decision about Jesus Christ.
Jack climbed into the motorcycle at the Kilns, not believing that Jesus Christ was God the Son of God. He got out of the motorcycle at Whipsnade Zoo, utterly convinced of it.
But then that second stage where he had been fighting the call of Jesus Christ, and he realized that he is the truth. You know, not just true about him, but he is the truth. And the second stage of that rocket went off. He came all the way home to faith in Jesus Christ.
And Lewis couldn't be a Christian until he grasped this astonishing truth that in Christ, these two disparate things are one. The Logos, the Word, the only faintly apprehendable glory of God, the Logos is made flesh, or as Lewis put it beautifully, myth is made history.
He lived the Christian life, minute by minute, day by day. He observed and listened and studied what Jesus said and then went out and did it. Probably better than anyone else I have ever met in my life.